Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us again for our weather outlook meeting. We wanted to do another in-person virtual meeting. That way, you guys could have a chance to interact as we're getting ready for crop insurance renewals, as we're getting ready to do some things out in the field as it's getting ready to dry out. We wanted to be able to have another interactive meeting where you guys can ask some questions of Brian as he looks at the nearby forecast along with the long-term forecast for this upcoming year. I would remind you that we have also our producer ag meetings coming up. And as we get into those, we want to invite everybody to join us. We'll be covering crop insurance changes, some of the grain marketing strategies that we're looking at, along with just a market outlook and how it affects growers here in Kansas. So with that, feel free to type questions as we go through this meeting, and we'll follow up at the end if there's anything we can ask those. So feel free to respond, and I will turn this over to Brian.
All right, thanks, Scotty. I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop here, and we will get going with the presentation. All right. Can you guys see me? There we go. How about that? Put this down here at the bottom. All right. So good to chat with you guys again. We got a lot to go through tonight, not necessarily an amount of long-term time that we have to go through, but just a lot of information this evening that I think personally that you're going to find valuable, because this is such a crucial, really about a 90 to 100-day period that we have coming up around our region that is going to either set us up for success for part of this growing season or is going to set us up to fail early in this growing season. So what do I mean by that? Well, right now we're doing okay. And this is for the past 60 days in terms of precipitation percent of normal or average. And you can see that there've been a lot of moisture across the state of Kansas. We've been really heavily loaded across east central and northeast Kansas. The southwest part of the state is flirting right around average, but still has a great amount of moisture that came through that's been very beneficial. So overall, you look at that over the past 60 days, we've been great, not only across Kansas, but really across the region. And that the region is really important, because the more moisture we can keep in the ground across the region, the more it's going to delay the onset of any potential dryness or drought that we would have going forward. These are the actual hard numbers in terms of inches that we've seen over the past 60 days. And you can see, again, the eastern, quarter of Kansas has been exceptionally wet. In some cases there between about 7 and 10 inches of total liquid moisture in the southwest of Kansas City. And then you go back to the southwest part of Kansas and you can see it obviously hasn't been as generous, but those areas were wetter early versus areas farther to the east. So overall, we're still in pretty good shape. The one area of concern for me, and you might say, well, why are you concerned about this, is southeast New Mexico and southwest Texas. Those two areas have been largely missed in terms of the frequency of the storms that have come through to produce any kind of moisture. Why is that important? Well, because they're dealing with drought down in that part of the area. And historically speaking, whenever we see drought build, it anchors itself to our south and southwest and then expands farther to the north. So if I had to lay money on a particular area of concern that where drought would actually get its origination and then get a foothold, it's going to be in those areas that are already experiencing drought right now. That's unless they get a significant storm over about the next 90 days. And by significant, it would have to be slow moving. It would have to be really soggy and have to deliver the goods in a big way for me to not be concerned about that area. But that's down there for now. Let's focus on the good beneficial stuff we've got going on up here. The next couple of weeks, this is a forecast precipitation anomaly for the next couple of weeks. And again, looks like we're going to be fairly inactive around here. The Madden-Julian oscillation has kind of collapsed a little bit. Again, that's that oscillation that's over in the Pacific Ocean that kind of moves across the Pacific Ocean and gives rise to different storms and different periods of wetter or drier weather. And right now, going forward for the next 2 weeks, really the central and southern plains are going to likely be in a period of drier than average type of conditions. Again, I think a lot of folks could use a little bit of time to dry out. So this isn't necessarily a bad thing. And after all, it is the back half of February, and we don't often think of February as being very wet. So if it's going to be drier than average, we'll take it right now. Ahead of a period of time where we would like it to actually be wetter than average. In terms of the next 45 days, the pattern simply recycles itself. Okay, so after we get beyond the next 2 weeks, wetter than average conditions likely going to set up again for from southeast Wyoming, eastern Colorado, most of Nebraska, most of Kansas, and extending its way eastward. And then if you drop farther south, there should be somewhat of a shutoff in that across the far southern plains. Again, those areas farther south across Oklahoma and Texas have also had some pretty good moisture recently. But again, I don't want to see those types of anomalies persist for very long to our south, because as I've said, the drought gets going south and then expands northward. So the longer we can delay that onset of dryness and potential drought, the farther south you go, obviously the better it is for us. But I really haven't made any, I haven't been shy about saying that I thought the spring was going to be active. If you've been listening to me very closely, we've been talking about that now for quite some time, and I really don't see any reason to deter from that line of thinking, at least for right now. Temperatures, I don't see them being exceptionally cold either. I think the main block of colder than average temperatures will be back to the west across Colorado and across the Rockies. That owes to an active storm track out there to the west that will eventually send storms eastward. But out ahead of that, there will be plenty of warmer than average weather. This next week, after we get past this weekend, is going to be a great example of a pretty significant warm up. That gives me a little bit of trepidation, though, because with all the good moisture we have in the ground, and if we get some warmer temperatures going on, that wheat's going to go to town in terms of growing. And if we get that wheat up tall enough, and then we have something come through late season in terms of cold air and whack it, that's a problem too. I see that as being the number one threat, at least in the short term, in terms of the winter wheat crop, which is obviously going gangbusters, considering all the moisture that we've had around here. So the potential for a late season freeze, I think, is definitely something that we have to look at very closely and monitor. Not necessarily because I think there's going to be a ton of cold air come down. I just simply think that the warm weather in combination with the moisture that we have may get that wheat a little bit taller than we want when that late season cold snap comes down. If it comes down, that's another thing. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there exactly what that would look like, but it's definitely on the front of my mind to be worried about that. If I see something significant coming up from southward from Canada here in about a month or so, that could be trouble. So I'm definitely going to be focusing on that for you guys going forward. I think it's something that we definitely need to pay attention to. In terms of the sea surface temperature anomalies, where are we with those right now? Well, we still have the El Nino that's going on. That's right there in the oval shaped area, says warm ENSO region, but that warmer than average body of water has been cooling off over the past month or so. This El Nino peaked in late December, early January, and obviously we've been cooling that off. There are two other areas of concern. One of those being where I have a negative PMM. That PMM stands for Pacific Meridional Mode, and basically it's an oscillation in the Pacific that's warmer than colder, and right there where you see the blue shaded areas there between Hawaii and the Baja, that's indicative of a negative PMM. If that coincides with a negative PDO, which we technically have right now, that colder than average water that's right there off the west coast of North America usually spells dry troubles going forward during the course of the summer. So those two areas I'm watching very closely to see how they change when the El Nino goes away, because the El Nino is in the process of going away. It's still there right now, but when it goes away, I'm worried about these two other areas up here to the north actually starting to cool off even more. Our seasonal surface temperature, sea surface temperature anomaly forecast starts there in February. You can see all of that orange and red go away, and it's replaced by blue in that ENSO region just to the west of South America. All right. You don't see a lot of cooling up there in those other two areas that I mentioned. But to be honest with you, I don't think the model handles those two areas very well right now. We'll have to see how that works out. But for me, if we haven't warmed those two areas up, the negative PDO and the negative PMM, during an El Nino, what would warm it up once the El Nino goes away. You know what I mean? So that's something I'm concerned about. But the Euro seasonal model here has us in El Nino by later this summer. And the NMME model, which I'm going to show you next, is even more aggressive with that. Look at all the blue shaded areas just going beast mode there off the west coast of South America. We'd be in full El Nino mode by June, or I should say full La Nina mode by about June, and then really flexes on us during the late summer and into fall. So a couple of things here. I do think it's very important to note that this El Nino is pretty much going to be over in about a month. And once it's out of here, the La Nina is going to start to come on. How fast it comes on, I think, is still in question, but I do anticipate this to be a fairly strong La Nina event, and that will no doubt have impacts on us, especially later this summer and obviously as we go into fall. So what I've done for you is I've put together some transition years here for you in terms of analogs, okay? So all of those years that you see right there are years when we've transitioned from El Nino to La Nina, and what March through May looks like historically during those times. So you go right up the middle of the country, you see the greens and the blues right there. That indicates wetter than average conditions, March through May, in all of those years when you average everything out. All right, so the March through May timeframe doesn't give me a whole lot of worry for those reasons that I'd mentioned, and especially since we've got good moisture in the ground right now. We're in a good place. After that, it starts to get a little bit muddy because the overall upper level pattern that prevails March through May, all of that purple out there is a very large area of cold upper level low pressure or storminess. It's a big storm generator, if you will, and it sends storms out in the midsection of the country. I've cherry picked a few of those years here at the bottom of the graphic for you: 73, 83, 95, 98, 2010, and 2016 as maybe being some of those years that match up a little bit more, a little bit better versus some of the others that I just showed you. But again, I have seen nothing historically when El Nino is transitioning to La Nina during March through May that would give me reason to be concerned for dryness at this point. If we didn't have any moisture in the ground, yes, I would be concerned about that. But because we've got good sub going on and good moisture over the past, say, 60 days or so, I'm not too worried about that at this juncture. When I do start to get worried is what happens June through August, okay? Because we lose that area of upper level low pressure over the western United States. The jet stream starts to go north, and then we have to see what happens with our thunderstorm season. Well, historically speaking, June through August hasn't been very beneficial in those transition years for basically the western 2/3 of Kansas, most of Oklahoma, back into West Texas and eastern New Mexico. The one difference there is the far eastern third of Kansas, which historically during those years has averaged out to be wetter than average. If we take this a step further and we go from September to December, again, the same type of signal shows up. The eastern third of Kansas is pretty much okay. The farther west you go, not so much. And then you see that dryness signal really building across the southern plains in Oklahoma and Texas, ready to make its way farther north. So to kind of compartmentalize this throughout the entire year, I've included all months during those years, during the El Nino to La Nina transition, May through December, and that's what you get. Eastern third of Kansas, western Missouri, on up into western parts of the Corn Belt, we do okay. The farther west you go and south you go, not necessarily okay with that. So, and I think that's important. When the historics are looking at this and matching up with what we're seeing, then we have to ask ourselves, well, what are the computer models doing with this? So let's look at that. The Euro seasonal model forecast for the month of March, right up along I-70, and northward, you don't see any problems. North half of Kansas, good shape. Most of Kansas, for that matter, is in good shape. But if you look farther to the south, you don't see it being as good down here across Oklahoma, Texas, and eastern New Mexico. If we go to April, we're still doing okay across the majority of Kansas. Nebraska, Iowa, a large part of the country is still okay. A little bit of dryness, though, still lingering down there in the southwest part of Texas and southeast New Mexico. Like I said, where it's dry right now, where that dry signal is most anchored presently. If we go to May, same story. Kansas, for the most part, is okay. Oklahoma's doing okay. Most of New Mexico and southwest Texas is not okay. Let's go to June. This is when we start to see the change taking place, and you can see that. The eastern half of Kansas, for the most part, is okay. Western part of Kansas, dries out. Colorado dries out. New Mexico stays dry. Most of Texas dries out. If we go to July, you see some dryness creeping in across most of Kansas, not excessively so. And if we have good moisture in the spring and we put more moisture in the ground, it will likely delay the onset of any dryness. That's why I'm saying the next 90 to 100 days is so critical that we continue to add to that moisture profile, because the more we do that, the more it will delay the inevitable, which is probably going to be some dryness. And then if we go to August within this model, you can see that we get a little bit of a bump here in terms of moisture, especially the southeast half of Kansas, Oklahoma, back into West Texas. I'm really not sure what this is about, except the possibility that I am expecting a very active hurricane season, not only in the Gulf of Mexico, but also out in the Atlantic Ocean. And that could mean that some of that tropical moisture has made its way up far enough north to have an impact on us. But you see, the farther west you go, you get shut out. Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Utah, those areas definitely not benefiting from that moisture. So if you had to say, well, what does the European model look like in comparison to history? I would say that it looks pretty close, especially on the front end. And that should give us a little bit more confidence in the forecast, at least for the next 90 days or so. The NMME model, which I'm going to show to you next, is going to show you kind of a same type of a deal here. This is for March. Again, you see Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, basically in good shape, but you've got dryness over the south, most of Texas. Excuse me, you drink water here. So again, where that dryness is located right now. And then if we go into April, you see something very similar. You have a dry signal over the southwest part of Texas, southeast New Mexico, Kansas, Nebraska, most of Colorado's doing okay. Keep in mind, in April, we're still going to have sea surface temperatures out there in the Pacific that are still warmer than average. Okay, we haven't gone completely away from those El Nino warming temperatures and gone to La Nina just yet. So we've got a little bit of time here to work with before things go backward. Now, May, you still see the eastern half of Kansas is okay. Most of Kansas average to above average. I think that is on the table. The dryness is farther west. If we go to June, you see dryness starting to creep in there, especially some stronger dry signals back here across New Mexico, Oklahoma, Texas. July, dryness starts to make its way farther north. You might say, well, what happened to Texas here? Well, look right here across east and southeast Texas and along the Gulf Coast. You see all that wetter than average stuff showing up. That, again, I think is a testament to the potential for the active hurricane season to get going not only early, but also likely stay late. If we look at August, it doesn't look a whole lot different from the Euro. You've got a lot of moisture here across parts of Texas that's likely tied to the hurricane activity. Some of that would make its way with the way this model is suggesting, would make it far enough north to keep a large part of Kansas, average. Far western Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, again, looks very similar to what the Euro model showed, that the farther west you go, you get out of that moisture channel. And then if we go to September, the hurricane activity goes away, and this is when we set into the true La Nina part of the forecast, where the fall is usually very dry, and that obviously bleeds into the winter months where we see things drier. And that's especially true south of I-70 across Kansas and then down into the southern plains. One more model that I want to show you is the IRI multi-model, March, April, May. And you see exactly where that dryness is anchored, again, across the southwest part of Texas, most of the Four Corners area right there. And then if we look at May, June, July, you see some of that dryness creeping into the western half of Kansas, but still really anchoring itself a little bit farther to the west. So that's kind of the message. The farther west you go, that's probably where you're going to see trouble show up sooner than areas farther east, which makes sense because eastern Kansas almost always gets more rain than western Kansas, unless you turn the pattern on its head. So, and this is kind of what we revert to. This is the water years, January through December, 2020, 21, and 22, when we had La Nina in control of us for the most part. And I know you remember what we dealt with. This is a visual of what we dealt with. All of those darker reds were significant precipitation deficits during that time. That encompassed basically the western half and almost western 2/3 of the United States during those years. So I am not a fan of us going back to La Nina in any way, shape, or form. The problem with this pattern that we've been in is that the El Niños are very short-lived, and they usually go away very quickly. So with that in mind, these are kind of my thoughts on this are we've got to be very, very judicious with the moisture that we have and how we use it. I mean, we've got to have the plan dialed in, because if we go into this growing season and we're really front loaded with moisture, that sub's only going to get us so far before, if we turn on the heat and then we turn on the dryness and then we can't finish things out. So I think you have to have that plan of attack really spelled out, what happens and what you're going to do if we go down that road again. Conversely, if we can keep that dryness at bay for a long enough period of time to where we can get in at least the wheat crop, then our attention turns to what are you going to do for your summer crops? Okay, do you still have that good subsoil moisture present, or has it completely gone? Again, that's something else that we can look at after we kind of eat what's on front of us in the plate on the plate right now. But if nothing else, I think we have to be prepared for this La Nina to have a significant influence on us, at least in the back half of 24, and as we head into the first half of 25. So with that in mind, I'll take any questions that you guys have.
Brian, and we kind of talked about it a little bit in our last meeting. As we continue to watch these weather patterns, we talked about it a little bit off screen earlier. Do we continue to see this potentially with the moisture that's there, push some of the heat units down as we get into that later part of the year?
Yeah, it's all about soil moisture. If the more moisture we keep in the soil, the more we will delay the heat and the dryness, because wet soil heats up a lot less than dry soil does. Once you dry out the soil, it's a terrible positive feedback. It's probably the worst positive feedback in weather, because the drier the soil, the more it heats up. The more it heats up, the more it dries out. The more it dries out, the more the wind comes into play. And you go down that road, and that's how you start a drought, pure and simple. If you keep the moisture in the soil, it does the complete opposite, okay? Soil heats up less, so you keep more moisture in the soil. Moisture in the soil helps brew thunderstorms. The more thunderstorms you have, the more moisture you put in the soil, the less wind you have, so on and so forth. They are very polar opposites in terms of what we see weather-wise, but it's all related to soil moisture. It's very critical. That's why I said the next 90 to 100 days is really paramount in what we put in the soil and how long we can kind of prolong the good times that we're having, versus us, starting to go backwards.
And one of the other questions that we've talked about amongst our risk management team is we kind of manage input dollars, manage our risk management dollars. As you talk about this hurricane season, does that usually lead to hail events? And do you kind of see that? Obviously, we dealt with quite a bit in Western Kansas last year. What's that look like as we run into wheat harvest, things like that this upcoming year?
I would definitely, with the amount of moisture that we've got in the ground right now, and me thinking we're going to have an active spring, shoving more moisture in the ground and bringing storms through, I would expect a very active, traditional severe storm season. And by traditional, I think you're looking at April, May, June is having the biggest thing. Remember last year, we had hail all the way into September. I don't think that that's going to be the case this year. I think our severe weather season is not going to be nearly as prolonged as it was last year, and that it's going to be front loaded for the reasons that I've mentioned. We're going to have active weather coming out of the Western United States. We've got moisture present. That usually helps to provide some pretty significant severe weather in the form of hail, damaging wind, tornadoes, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I've been telling all of my clients and anybody that I talk to that's interested, whether you're a wheat farmer or whether you're a storm chaser, to kind of buckle up for that traditional severe weather season.
One of the questions that I had gotten text in was, we have a lot of subsoil moisture now, or it's starting to be there. The ground, is finally starting to dry out. Some guys will probably get into the fields. Do we look at this moisture? Obviously, most of the ponds here in Kansas, throughout Kansas, but a lot of central Kansas as well, are dry. They're, bone dry. Do we see the moisture coming in probably to be able to fill back up some of these ponds and reservoirs and things like that?
Yeah, I think there's potential for that, especially with the active spring that's likely going to take place. So coupled with that active spring, there will no doubt be some big rains in there. And we still have winter to be left in there too. We could still see it, and that's especially true in western Kansas. We're just fixing to enter blizzard season. Okay, so not everything that falls out there in western Kansas is going to be in the form of liquid. There's going to be plenty of white with some of the stuff that comes through too. The farther east you go, obviously you deal with things that are warmer and you have better opportunities to just see some significant rain. So I think that yeah, helping to fill up some ponds and some dams, I think is on the table, again, during the next 90 to 100 days especially.
Okay. What I would just add to the people on the call and maybe listening to the recording is that Brian also sends out a lot of weekly updates if there's storms coming in, things like that. And if you'd like to receive that information from us, please just reach out to somebody with Producer Ag, somebody with MKC, because a lot of you guys are calving. And if you want a little bit of an update, maybe on a forecast that's coming through, we can gladly get you guys that information from Brian. So with that, we don't have any other questions. I'll just leave really our crop insurance team here up on the page. As we go into signups, as we go into renewals, remember March 15th is a big deadline. And we're going to be talking about some of the changes and different things going on in our Producer Ag update meetings here over the next 2 weeks. So hopefully you're able to attend those. If not, reach out to us and we'll continue to have these weather meetings and continue to provide you guys with risk management tools as you guys go into making decisions here in the near future. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Scotty. You guys take care.
Thank you.